Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a Modern UKG song inspired by artists like Caribou, Sammy Virji, Fred Again, and Skrillex. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 5 to 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of Modern UKG music production. What you're listening to right now is the song that we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. What we'll be doing is going in order of how to actually build things out. So in this one, I actually started with the bass, then added in all the melodic elements, and then added in the drums, and then the effects. And I did this in a particular way because well, you're gonna see in a minute. And what we'll actually do is for each one of these is go in order as the track says it actually built it out, so you can follow along when you're creating songs in this style. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we'll also be doing a full 80-20 rule recap, so you can pay good attention to the key components of this style of creating music so that you can follow along in your own tracks and apply what you're learning in this video directly to the music that you make. Because all in all, it only took about 5 or 6 hours for me to complete this song. As you can see, it's mixed, mastered, arranged, and ready to go. And if you'd like help finishing songs faster just like this, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level and really dive into this project file, you can find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. So with that said, let's jump into this one. Alright. So when it comes to the drums for this one, I did do things a little bit differently. So what I do have here is the track, the Caribou track Honey in here. And I've set it up so that, as usual, I've turned off the track and I set it up so when I press the S key on my keyboard, I can click between this and the drums that I've been working on. What I did a little bit differently though, is I kind of set up this little loop for the Caribou Honey track where I found like a spot where there was just the drums. And then if I pull out here, you'll notice that I copied this through the whole track. And I was just actually using this as like the drum track as I was building out like the bass and all the melodic stuff. And then later, once I realized that noticed that things were sounding good, then I worked on the drums and replaced the drums so they were original. I don't want to release a track with like the Caribou Honey drums behind it. But so with that said, that's kind of an interesting way to go about things where you can kind of like get a cool vibe of the drums in your track and build out your track around those drums. And since you can follow like a repeatable process like this to get very similar sounding drums, you can build up the track really quickly, make sure the track sounds sick, and then go ahead and adjust the drums. But with that said, so when I press the S key, you can hear I'm jumping back and forth. Kind of the trick again is to flick back and forth in time. And so the first step is usually the kick that I start with. So having a look at the pattern here, what we have is we're just rocking like classic 4 on the floor. I know it's like a UKG vibe and sound like that modern style, but sometimes I think it's okay for UKG to not have like the 2-step sound. I could be wrong about this and like let me know if I am, but in this instance, yeah, it's just kind of like that 4 on the floor style of it, and like the UKG bit comes with like the skippiness of the hats and the snare work, and also a little bit of this extra little fill. So there's like the classic 4 on the floor bit, and then there's this little fill that happens, which is cool. It adds a little bit of like that kind of skippy UKG vibe in my opinion. So that's a look at the pattern. What I did do is like the extra notes that are hitting are at lower velocities, and that way they're not like too in your face, because it's like a kick is a pretty big fat ass sound, so it can be overwhelming to have too much of that. But with that said, in terms of the sound design, what I ended up with is this RPS old friend EDM kick from Rocket Powered Sound. And the way that I did that was with the little trick that I like to do with similar sounds. So essentially I have like the reference track playing here, and that trick is to cut a little piece of like the snare, so I can do it right here. So you can hear this kick, and then if you consolidate it and then you right click it and press show in browser, it'll show it up in the browser. And then what you want to do is then click this show similar sound button, and you can go through it and find a bunch of different sounds using the similar sound function. This way what you're doing is you have a sound that's similar to the track that you are emulating, but not fully ripping it off or stealing the sample directly from the track, which I think is great. So what I ended up with is this. this RPS kick sound, and then I found, am I playing this too? And then so this is what the RPS kick sounds like by itself. Very like low end kind of thing. And then what I also did is I layered in like the high end of that actual Caribou drum bit. And I guess something that I should show you too that I did a little bit differently in this one is how I isolated the kick in this, and how I got a lot of the drum sounds is, I believe if I go over here, yeah, over here, what I did is I ran that loop, that reference loop that I've been using into La, which is stem separation software. And then let me turn this on right here. Oh, no sound from this for some reason. Well, anyways, I'm going to keep moving on. But what I did was I separated the drums from the rest of the loop so that I was able to like cut out the drum samples in a very, very easy way, and then use the similar sound function. So that's kind of how I went about that, and how I stole a bunch of different of the cool snare sounds in this. But anyways, kind of a ramble there. Cool opportunity there is you have this main kick in here, like a one shot that's doing most of the heavy lifting. And what I've done is I've layered in the Caribou tune in track in my R kick, which is just like a bunch of like things that can be useful to isolate the sound a bit more, just like bring up the filter envelope and then bring down the filter frequency so it sounds less like you're just dulling up the sound. Bringing up the volume to velocity so it just hits a little bit harder. Little things like that. And then I do believe that, okay, I'm actually just running this kick without removing any of the low end from it, which sometimes you might want to do so it's not like overlapping and too much low end. But in this case, I thought it sounded sick, so moved on from that. And then I'm running in all of that into a drum bus. Oh, and one other thing is like this extra bit. I found a different sample for that extra little fill. Just another one that I found while I was going through like the similar sound functionality there. Then when I'm running into this drum bus, which I've been liking the last little bit, if you listen to the difference. And with it, there adds like a little bit of body and thickness. It is adding some volume, so pay attention to that as well. But it's increasing a little drive, a little bit of the boom, and then adjusting the decay to control the amount of that low end boominess that's happening. If you can hear, if I pull it all the way up, especially with headphones, it has a lot of boominess, which actually sounds sick, but it's nice to dial that in. And then EQ8 is more of like a little trick. I have this set up so that the low or the high pass here is at 200 hertz, and I turn it off and on like that to use it as like a more of an arrangement trick. Moving on from the kick, the next element that I added in was these open hi-hats. So let's have a look and listen to this. Oh, one thing I should mention too, a big huge part of this trick with having the reference in is then flicking back and forth between what you have. So first you get the right notes, then you get the right sounds, you select the right samples, and then the main thing is to get the right volumes. Getting the right volumes compared to your reference track is going to be that thing that gets you 80% of the way there. So like you can get really into like the processing of each track, but really the main thing is just get those volumes right, and you're going to be really, really close to getting the right result. That said, let's jump into the next element, which is this open hat. And there's a little bit of something going on here that I think is pretty cool. So for one, it's like the hat's on the offbeat, like as you can see here. But then also in the second half of it, this other element comes in and slowly velocities in, which I think I was hearing in the track. If you listen really close to the open hat, it's like slowly building in. So that's a really, really cool thing that they did in this track that I thought was really freaking cool. But in terms of then the sound selection, what I did is there's a couple different sounds going on. So one is I snatched one of the hat sounds from the actual track Caribou Honey. So again, what I did is I dropped that drum loop into La La and did some stem separation. So I was able to get a nice clean grab of that hi-hat sound. And then I just layered it up with some of my own sounds. This is another one. That's the one that comes into the back half. It's more like reverby and open. And then there's this other hat sound that I found by doing the similar sound trick. So again, you can just grab this, go show in browser, and you can find similar sounds to the hi-hat that you've stem separated from the track, which is really cool. So then layer them over top of each other. I feel like that's a cool way because when you're snatching samples like that, it can be nice to have your own higher quality one-shots to reinforce the sound and also make it a little bit more unique, and so you're not just using like stolen samples. I think is a cool way to go about things. But then other than that, a little bit of the standard channel processing, so we're removing some lows so it's not interfering with the kick, anything like that. And in this case, I'm adding a little bit of saturation, which is filling up the sound and making things sound a little bit, fuller, a little bit of grit added to the sound. And these are all part of like the one knob effects that I like to use so that you're quickly mix as you go, use your ears more than your eyes, and just make the moves quickly and move through it. Other than that, the main thing is flicking back and forth, really focusing on the hi-hat and trying to get the volumes right. Then the next element that I added in was the closed hat, so let's take a look and listen. Here's the MIDI. And then the reference. Try to listen to the closed hats. It's almost the skippiness of it, playing along the open hat. So you could have a listen to that. It's kind of similar to what I have. Mine sounds a little bit more straight. This is a lot looser and cooler, I would honestly say. But this was my crack at it. And so the main idea is like kind of going for that like 16th notes shuffle, and then adding a bit of shuffle by moving, like having different velocities. So you can see down here, there's so many different velocities going, some with like the randomization velocity to try to add some humanization, and then also some of just playing different samples as a way to make it sound a little bit more unique and different, a little more humanized. So that's the idea there. And I think I might have added some skippiness by doing that sound generation thing. I'm not 100% sure if I did it. I think I did this rhythm, and then you can set like the different like density and all that and generate different little patterns to get that skippiness. And then I just turned off, you can see here, by pressing 0 on any of the MIDI notes, you can turn it off. And I just turned off the notes I didn't like, and then ended up with this kind of cool skippy pattern. In terms of the sounds, there's a couple different hat sounds. Like I mentioned, I like to use a bunch of different hat sounds. It makes it sound a little bit more human and interesting. So I got this one. Let me solo the hi-hat for a second. So this is just a weird little hat sound that I stole from the Caribou drum track after I'm separating it. And then there was another shaker that I found. Feel like there are some sounds like this, and then some just like hat sounds that I have. This is the main stuff here, and here's another one. So just kind of did a combination of grabbing stuff from the actual track, using the similar sound function to find something similar, which was this extra shaker, and then just some other hi-hat sounds that I liked to find something similar to create the overall hi-hat pattern here. And then other than that though, again, main thing is once you have the notes down, the pattern you like, once you have the samples down, the main thing is the sound, or the volume. You can hear here, it's pretty nestled in there. Like mine might be too loud is what I'm saying, but again, something I do like to mention too is as you're building this out against the reference, start taking liberties and like letting your track go with a different flow. Going for a carbon copy is cool and can be useful to like hone your skills, but if you want to use this as something that you can actually release and have as an original track, at some points you're going to want to start letting like your natural decision making take over. But other than that, some of the processing here is just standard channel shift stuff, removing some of the lows so it doesn't interfere with the kick or the bass, and then some saturation to fill out the sound a little bit and have it push out more. But again, main thing is the volumes. So let's move on to the next element, which is the snare. So let's have a look and listen. Zoom the fuck out. So for this, what I noticed is a couple things happening. One is there's the standard placement of the snare on like the 2 and the 4 of each beat. And then there's these cool little skippy bits that are on like these little triplet bits. Yeah, so I have the triplet grid on. So if I turn that off, you can see it's off, which is really cool. I think that's like a kind of a big part of like the UKG sound, little skippy bits on triplets. And so what we have going on here is a little bit. So let me go through the sound selection a little bit in detail here. So first, we have like the sounds that are just on the between the 4. And this, I just use by flipping back and forth and trying to get something similar. Sounds like there's some high end but a little bit of body, so I went with 2 different snare sounds. One to have a little bit more body and one bit to have more bit of that high end. And then for the skippy bit, what I did was I have this. I stole what Caribou was doing from the drum separation for one of the hits and for the other one of the hits, and then reinforced it with something similar. Again, same idea as normal. I really like the reinforcing bit there. And then other than that, volumes. Something like that. And then just really not doing much here in terms of processing, just making sure there's no low end mud or anything like that. Next thing I added in was this clap to kind of reinforce that the snare sound basically. And if we flick back to the reference, ours, the clap is adding quite a bit of that like cool high end sound. And then so in terms of the pattern, it's just on the 2 and the 4, just like the snare. And what I've done is I have one of the Caribou sounds for the snare and the clap, or whatever you want to call it. And then I've layered them up with different of like one shots from my library and changed it up. So there's just like some movement happening. So it's 2 of these same my hits and then a different one and then a different one. So it just makes it sound a little bit more different and moving, and like some of the energy's happening to it. We have a listen to these real quick. Here is the isolated snare hit. So sometimes when you snap samples from like a stem separated like anything, they can sound a little weird. And so it kind of adds a little bit of the vibe, but then I think it's important to like I've been mentioning, reinforce them with some other sounds that are playing throughout it. And then main thing there is like trying to balance it between the snare that you've previously added in. Because again, volumes are pretty much everything here. Then in terms of processing, just removing some of the lows like natural, and I've set it up so my audio track and my MIDI track is set up with this channel strip and has the 200 hertz automatically taken out, so it's always getting rid of that automatically. So super fast mixing, because I don't even have to like load this up or make this move, it just happens automatically. So with that said, just a few more things here. Usually my method is like build out like the core sound, so kick, open hat, hi-hat, snare, and claps with your like one shot, and then just start adding in loops and breaks and stuff like that to add some extra character and some extra vibe. So let's have a look at what I added next, which is this drum loop here. I'm gonna solo it for you as well. And so what I went for here is a drum loop that was trying to add more to that skippiness that I was trying to get with my closed hats by bringing in a loop that's doing it better than I could, and to reinforce the what I've already done. So what I do want to show you too is a couple things that I did do to the clip here. First is if I go here and switch this to clip, what I've done, okay, this maybe looks a little weird, but what I've done is I've set the loop of the envelope to so it's not linked anymore, because what I want, like, it'd be the same thing as like having this pattern here duplicated like 4 times over. This way you can have it so it's just gonna run this little automation to the clip gain volume over and over again, so I just have to do it once. And so what I'm doing here is bringing up the volume and bringing it down in a way that's kind of making this track more have that skippy vibe that I'm trying to go for. So it's like the skippiness is coming in and then going out and coming in and coming out. So that's kind of creating the skippiness. So you can see it ducking the gain on the clip here. And then what I did next is I brought down the transient. So when you're on the warp mode and you have transient selected and you select the one where the arrow is pointing to the right, you can drag this value down and it's going to tighten up the sound. So this is with it up. Still sounds pretty cool up. But the idea is I'm finding more and more with adding in like top loops and breaks, By bringing down the transients like that, it makes it a tighter sound, which helps it blend in more with the core sound that you've already built out. And it's a nice way to have it more being a supporting role so that your core loops are the main event, really. Next thing is, I guess let's take a look at any processing. So there's a little bit going on here. What I've done is I've removed a lot of the lows at around 200 hertz. And then I have a low shelf that's getting rid of some of the mids. And then that way it's just an effort to have it more blend in with the rest of the core elements again. Then what we have is some one knob sidechain. So the way that I do it is an Ableton shaper device going at quarter notes, which is what the kick is normally doing, and then just ducking a gain on a utility. So just, that way it's just a one knob situation. You can just bring in the sidechain by ear and then move on without having to spend too much time dialing in compressors and all that kind of boring stuff. You just get the sidechain sound a lot quicker, dial it in with your ears and move on. Same thing with the saturation. So there's this Ableton saturator, just a little one knob here. I'm just bringing it in, adding more fullness and some grit to the sound. And then what I have here is this width plugin. This is the free Polyverse Wider plugin, which looks like this. And what I've just done is map the core knobs to an Ableton rack so that, again, I can quickly just dial this in and move on without having to open up a VST and all that kind of stuff. So this is just adding some width to the sound, making it more stereo left and right, and making space for what's in the middle, which is like more of the core sounds that we've added in. But other than that, the idea is like a little bit of listening to the reference, but mostly at this point, dialing this in to blend in with the rest of your sounds. So let's keep moving on. Another one that I've added in is this top loop. So let's have a listen to that. And let's solo it. So this is freaking cool. I wasn't sure if this was like a drum bit or not, but if you listen to the reference, there's something like that. Some like wicka wicka kind of sound. And so what I did is I just looked something up on Splice that was kind of going for something similar. I think I was looking up weird percussion is what I looked up. And then I cut up the loop a little bit to like the parts that I liked that was kind of getting that similar rhythm. And then what I did was a little bit more processing here. So I'm removing a bunch of the lows here, some sidechain so that it's pumping and making room for the kicks, and saturation so it's filling out. Then I throw on this effect rack here, and I have this pan man kind of just moving the sound between the left and right a little bit, just as like a cool idea kind of thing. And then a lot of like that wicka wicka sounds coming from this auto filter. So if I turn this off, kind of sounds cool, kind of sounds like ass. But the idea is like finding something that's sharp and like close to the sound, but then like dulling it down with the auto filter. And so like what I have here is I bring it down to 427 hertz, bringing up the resonance so it's kind of making it sound a little bit more filtery. And then I'm adding in this LFO. So the LFO is moving at 16th notes, and then I've dialed it in a bunch. And so that way it's moving the filter up and down at that rate, which is adding that cool kind of like swelling wicka wicka sound. So that's how I went about that. Pretty happy with how it turned out. And then again, just flicking back and forth to try to get the volumes. I know it's really tucked in there, so it's a little difficult, but it's what it is. And then just a couple more that we're gonna go through here. The next thing I have is this like weird fill thing. Let me solo it for you too. If we listen to the reference, I feel like there's something like that going on. If you can hear like almost on the left and right, it's almost very stereo and it's very reverbed. Gotcha. Something like that. So I heard that and I thought it was really freaking cool. So I was trying to emulate something like that. I think I don't know what I looked up again. It might have been something like weird fill on Splice. And found something that was similar, and then just had to process it a little bit. So we're removing a bunch of the lows here, and then shelving up some of the highs to try to like nestle it in and make it less like in your face, because it's a pretty subtle element, but it adds like this like subtle complexity to the overall like drum loop. Like this sounds so interesting. It's not your classic 4 on the floor like house beat. This, I don't know, some weirdness to it, and I think it's really freaking cool how this turned out and how Caribou did in their track. But and and making sidechain so it's pumping, doing that thing, and making sure that it's making room for the kick. And then that's about it for that one. Trying to nestle this one in with the volume. I know it's tough because it's a subtle element and like not perfectly one-to-one recreated, but that's the idea there. And then last but not least, let's go over this last loop that we have here. And then solo it. So this is just like a classic, like kind of like house break. It's probably what I looked up on Splice. What we're doing is that transient trick to tighten up the sound a bit, so it's blending in with the rest of the sounds. I think what I wanted here was just a little bit of extra something to like blend in with the core sounds and add some like extra vibe and character. And so that's what we have here. Standard channel shift stuff, removing some lows, some sidechain so it's pumping and making room for the kicks, and saturation to fill it out, and a little bit of width to make it a little bit wider. And that's kind of look at these drum loops. Pretty freaking happy how it turned out. It's really unique and I was excited to work on it. Alright. So when it comes to the bass for this one, it's like with the drums, I think it's like a lot differently than normal. So the process is like I have the reference track in here, Caribou song Honey, and I have it turned off, and I have set up the S key so I can flick back and forth. But if you notice here, I didn't really follow the bass too much on this one, and instead what I did was this. I found this nice loop of the Caribou Honey track, like I grabbed a part in the song where like just the drums are playing, and then I like duplicated it through the whole track. And then instead of recreating the drums first, I just used that to build the rest of the track around. And so what I actually did next was, the first thing I added was this. Let me just jump to it. The first thing I added was this. This Gorilla's vocal here. And so let's just jump back to over here. And the reason I did that is, one of my buddies, Jesse, he wanted me to make like a flip of the Feels Good Inc. song that you were hearing for like an NFT project. So I was like, okay, I feel like I can do two birds with one stone and like recreate a sick track and also make a flip of that. And I feel like I pulled it off. So what I did was first grab this drum track, then I'd grab the vocal track and overlay the vocal track over top of what's playing here, to make sure that the vocals would fit with the style of drums before I even recreate the style of drums. And then what I did was I made the bass line underneath that to make sure everything was working. So it's like a way to make sure that I wasn't wasting any time building this out. And so just a little different way of working on these things that you might want to consider. And so when it comes to the bass on this, I didn't necessarily reference any one track, but I was going for the overall vibe of like the Virji vibe, the like Fred Again UKG vibe, the new Skrillex UKG vibe in building this out. So let me walk you through what I did here, because it's a little different. There's several different MIDI tracks as well as some audio tracks that I used to get this. So we'll work on the first thing that I built out, which was this. Let me turn off all the melodic stuff so we're just listening to the drums and the bass. So this is the first thing. So what you might be able to notice is it's more or less like the first notes of like the do 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 do, like cool Feels Good Inc. Bass line, with the exception of this second note here is more of like it's playing like an off key note a little bit, which is making it sound a little darker and interesting. And there's a little bit of a call and response going on here, and the response comes from the other elements of the bass that we're going to introduce. So this is kind of what I started with. And in terms of the processing, we're using this V-sub that I built out. It's just a basic sub sound using operator, and I've added in all these opportunities to add in saturation to kind of make it come out of the sound a bit, or it's come out of like bad speakers a little bit more and add a little bit of like grit and interest to it. And then also there's like a one knob sidechain built in so that the sound is pumping and making room for the kick. Other than that, main thing is kind of going by ear with this one. I wasn't really going against a reference track necessarily. So I kind of just built up this sub sound against the kick sound. So it's a little bit different way of doing things. Then the next element that I added is this right here. So let's have a listen, look at. So you can kind of hear like It's kind of like slowly starting to build that out, and I'm adding it with all these different sounds. So what I did do is if you can see all these like turned off notes, I finished the rest of like that bass line, like the Feels Good Inc. bass line, and then turned off the notes that I didn't want to use. So there's a bunch of call and response that's going to be going through this. So in terms of the sound design, I'm using Vital, and what I'm actually using here is this Daga bass preset, which is a really sick bunch of presets that a YouTuber called Be The Lick made, and recreated a bunch of like UKG tracks. I think a lot of from Sammy Virji, which is really sick. So this is like a really sick song called Daga Da. And so I'm not good at sound design, so I like to just find other presets and sample things and that kind of thing. So big shout out to Be The Lick for this, because I don't know how to do this, but definitely check out his channel because they show you how to do this and have these presets available, which is really badass. So basically my way to get the UKG sound was to just define samples and like presets in that style, and then just move on instead of spending hours on like sound design, which I really don't like to do. So that's my little hack right there. So badass sound right there. Then I'm doing a little bit of some extra processing here. So I have this shifter on. Without it, it just sounds a little thinner. I'm just trying to make it add a little bit of like bassiness to the sound. But then we're removing it right away here. So we have this EQ at 200 Hertz. Because we do have other elements in the track that are going to introduce more subby sounds, which we'll get to. It's all about, in this case, having these different sounds all layered and working together. Then we're running into some sidechain. I like to do it like this. This is the same sidechain little module that I have in that V sub. And it's just a shaper device going to quarter notes and ducking down some gain. This way it's a one knob situation. You can just dial in the sidechain without having to introduce a compressor and route the compressor and dial in all the stupid settings. Like, I'm not into that style of wasting time. I like to just move on quickly, and so like I really like having like one knob effects like this that I've created to just make things quicker, so you can mix by ear, move on through your process a lot quicker. Then what I'm running into is this one knob width plugin, which is actually a free plugin from Polyverse Wider. And so what I've just done here is I've mapped all the core knobs again to an Ableton rack so that I can just quickly dial things in by ear without having to open up a VST and be distracted by the VST and all that. You can just move a lot quicker, dial in the sound that you want and move on. So what this is doing is just making that sound a little bit more stereo, making room for stuff to be important in the middle, which is going to be the more sub sounds that we're about to introduce. So that's a look at this one. Next thing I added in was another Vital sound, and so let's have a look and listen to this. It's a little weird, but let's have a listen to it soloed now. So pretty cool. It's subtle. Let's have a listen one more time. And so what this is another Vital preset from Be The Lick as well. This is another one that he did, and it's just like another kind of UKG sound that he was replicating from the track. So again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm trying to get a track done. So sound is sick presets. Definitely check out his channel and just throw that in there. Then we're removing a bunch of the lows because we have other elements that will be taking care of the sub, and then shelving out a bit of the highs to kind of help nestle the sound in a little bit more. It's almost more of like a little effects trick than bass part, but I think it's really cool. And then again, one knob sidechain, so it's pumping, making room for the kick, and a little bit of one knob saturation, which is it's just Ableton Saturator again, just dialed into like one knob to make things quicker and more accessible, adding a little bit of fullness and a little grip to the sound. And then what I have here is another free plugin that's amazing, Alex Hilton's A1 Trigger Gate, which also I think I found from a Be The Lick YouTube video, so definitely go check out his channel. And this is adding that like kind of stuttery effect. And then so that's a look at that one. As you can see here slowly, these different sounds and different elements are all coming together to create a call and response and some kind of interesting, dynamic and sound. So then what I did next is I added in a sub sample. And let's have a look and listen to this. This is what it sounds like on its own. It's like an 808 kind of sound, subby 808 sound. Found something on Splice, dropped it in here, cut up the points I wanted, and kind of lined it up so there was like a call and response, and it was filling out some of the low end there. What we're doing is just, we'll have a tiny bit of the low end. I wanted it to, I guess, have that kind of call and response bit. So the first sub is really subby, and then this is like not as subby, so there's still a little bit of call and response going. But other than that, just all in the volume. And then we have one more element here. Let's listen to it on its own. You can hear it has that like swelling kind of sound. Let's listen to it again. Listen for like the swelling, like almost filtering sound. The almost wubbiness. So that like wubbiness, I feel like it's kind of characteristic in some of this more modern UKG sound. So trying to introduce some kind of elements of that. And so this, as you can see, is playing over top of the sub notes that I have played in. And so because of that, what I'm doing is removing some of the low end so that it's not conflicting too much with the sub. And then just a little bit of side chain so that it's pumping, making room for the kick to come through and adding that nice like bounce. And then a little bit of this width plugin. So it's making this sound a little bit more stereo, whereas the sub sound is very mono. So that way there's a little bit of an effort to make the sound sound more full, and then also make it so it's interfering less with the elements that it's being layered against. But with that said, then we're running it into we're running into a few things. So I have this K clip that we're going into. So this is the bus processing. All of this is in one group and processing everything together. Particularly important when there's all these different sounds. Having it all running through some similar processing on a group level or bus level is a good way to kind of glue things together, make it sound like they're all one bass that are meant to be together. So I'll show you how I cracked on with that. First thing is I'm running into this K clip, looking for about a decibel or so of clip. And this is gonna kind of get rid of the peaks a bit and allow you to introduce more headroom into the track. So that way you can make it louder when you're exporting it. And then I'm running into this like bus processing group that I've created. And so it's a couple different things. So what we're running into is this bass punch and parallel preset, which is like New York compression, parallel compression, that kind of thing. And it's very exaggerated compression settings, but dialed in only a little bit. So that way it kind of isn't sounding too overly compressed, and it can add a lot of like fullness and character to the sound. Then running into some slight, like a very small amount of ambient saturation. This way all those elements are running through a similar saturator, kind of gluing things together. And these two things, compression, saturation, running everything through this, is an attempt to kind of glue everything together, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's a good look at the bass that I built out here. A little different how I normally do things. Usually I'm building up against a reference track and then start making some changes. But since I was going about this in a way where I was trying to create a song for a friend and also create a style, I don't know, it just came a little different, but hopefully you found it useful. Alright. So when it comes to the melodic elements for this one, like the vocals, synths and stuff like that, different than I normally do things in a couple different ways. One is that one of the first elements that I actually added, like I mentioned in like the previous videos here, is the first thing I added was this like drum track. So I have Caribou song Honey in here, and I have this drum loop, and I've set it up so that I can turn it off and on. And I actually built the song against this drum loop first. And then what I added in next was actually this vocal bit here. And the reason I did that is because a friend of mine wanted me to create a Feel Good Inc. tune for like an NFT project. So I was like, okay, I think I can do this in combination with creating like a remix and rebuild. And so once I had the drums, I added in the vocals to make sure they worked together, and then started building everything out. And so what I had in first was I got this Gorillaz Feel Good Inc. I think I just grabbed it off of YouTube, to be honest. And then what I did was a little bit of some interesting stuff with the processing. So I have this chain here where there's nothing in it. And then I'm also bringing in this Nectar, which is this cool plugin my buddy John Alpine showed me. And basically what he showed me is you can help map the LFO to the pitch, the formants, and then you can create this kind of like weird like sound to the vocals where they're like going like and like slightly morphing. You can hear that. If you can hear that, it's like slowly morphing and moving, and I love it. I'm so glad he showed me this. So that's one of the first things I threw on there, so it just sounds a little more interesting and cool. Then we're just removing some of the lows, so it's not interfering with the bass of the kick or anything like that, and creating any mud. A little bit of one knob sidechain. The way that I do it is I have a Ableton shaper here mapped to quarter notes, which is the rate that kick is usually hitting on, and then just it's ducking the gain, so it's similar functionality, but this way you don't have to map a compressor to anything, and you can get like that cool pumping sound with a one knob effect. And then I'm running into this Ableton saturation device. It's just Ableton saturator with the mapped to one knob, so I don't have to deal with like the Ableton saturator as a way to make things a little quicker and easier. And we're using saturation generally to fill out the sound a little bit more and add a little bit of kind of character and grit. So once that was in, and by the way, I'm going to keep the main box off for the most of this. I'll flick it on every once in a while so you can hear how things are working together. But I did turn it off so that it's not interrupting with like my voice, and it can be a little hard to hear two voices essentially, right? So that's it. That was the first thing that I did. I do have some other points in the song where I'm overlapping basically this bit right here. So let me turn this on for you. And so what this is like the, it's just a part of the intro. It's cool. I think it adds a little bit of character to the rest of the track. So I added it in, and I just chopped it up so that it's removing that like thing, because it was clashing with the rest of my melodic elements, like the bass and whatnot. And I've kind of making that happen with like the style of the bass there, and a way to make things a little bit different. So I threw this on here, nothing too crazy in processing. It's just removing a bunch of the lows, removing a bunch of the highs as a way to kind of like nestle it in, make sure that it's not interrupting the kick or the bass or anything. A little bit of one knob sidechain, so it's pumping and adding, making room for the kick. Some saturation to bring the sound out a bit more in terms of fullness and a little bit of grit. And then what I am doing too is I have this one knob width plugin, which is a free plugin from Polyverse called Wider. It's a really, really cool plugin for kind of more stereoizing stuff. So it's kind of pushing the sound to the left and the right a little bit, making it more stereo. And that way, when it's played with this, it's not getting in the way as much. It's leaving room for it. And then other than that, I just mapped some of the main knobs of Polyverse Wider onto this Ableton rack just for ease of use and convenience, and that way you're mixing with your ears more than your eyes and not opening up plugins all the time and getting stuck in the beautiful interface or anything like that. The next thing that I added was this little perk thing. I wonder what even... Have a listen to it by itself. Yeah, kind of useless. It's almost like a little, it's almost more of a percussion thing. I don't know if this is, actually the funniest thing. I remember someone left a comment, and if you're watching, I love you for this. When I've done this before, like put like a percussion or drum bit in like the melodic group, and then just like this, and the comment was like, good to see that you put the percussion in the wrong group to show that you're not AI, which I thought was hilarious. So this is just kind of like going into like the snare and adding like into that. Not really that interesting, but kind of cool. It's a little like more of a sound design trick. I want to maybe show you this element that I skipped over. See that? So that's actually pretty cool and I think worth mentioning. So this was apparently the first thing I added before I added the vocals. Let's have a listen. It's like kind of adding to that UKG like wubby dubby step little kind of sound. So I just found some cool wub dub thing on Splice, dropped it in here at the end of each bar, and then just nestled it in by removing some of the lows and some of the highs, some sidechains so it's pumping. And then it's like a more of a subtle thing, but I think it's kind of cool, adds to the vibe here. And then what we have next is this little bit here. So let's have a look and listen to this. This is interesting. Hear the swelling? And then listen to it one more time and let me solo for you. And so this I actually did hear, if we listen to the kick, the drum beat that I was referencing, you can hear like, listen to that like, kind of swelling up. You can hear that, that's kind of what I was going for here. So I just found like a vocal bit in like Splice, and then threw it in here. And it was like, I think I looked up vocal swell. And then so it's kind of already doing the sound that I want in the right key that I want. And then a little bit of processing going on here. Moving some of the lows so it's not interfering with the low end or anything like that. So sidechain so it's pumping, making room for the kick. And then I think a lot of it's coming from this. That's without it, and then with it I have this auto filter brought down to 2k hertz, and I have this 16th note rate and the LFO turned on to 16th notes. So that's what's kind of giving it a little bit of that like shaking sound, which is something I kind of heard in that Caribou tune. So that was cool. And then the next thing I added in is this. So let's have a look at this. The vocal. And I'm going to solo it for you. And this, I just looked up some like vocals in the same key of the track in Splice, and then kind of cut it up a little bit. And what I was referencing was like, if you listen to this Caribou track again, you can kind of hear like a little vocal bit. It's almost kind of like ee-hoo, 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 ee-hoo is what I was kind of hearing. You can hear it. It's like lower than that swell sound. And so that's what I was trying to like emulate there. I was flicking back and forth between this and the reference, which is usually what I do with these tracks when I'm like referencing something very closely. It's flicking back and forth like this to try to get the right patterns, sounds, selection, and then volumes. And getting the right volumes is really the key, I would say. But yeah, a different way about going things for this one, so I'm hoping this is all useful for everyone. But so then what we have in terms of the processing for this track is a bit of sidechain, so it's pumping, and then also making room for the kick. I'm running into this effect rack, which is probably, I really like the Pan Man for the sound toy stuff, so this is just moving it between the stereo spectrum a little bit, kind of making it a little bit more interesting, as well as making space for the stuff that's in the middle. Then I'm running into this shifter, so this is making it sound a little bit more cut through a little bit with a slightly high, it's at 1 octave higher. So it's just very, very subtle, almost not even needed. And then what I'm doing is a little bit of EQ here. So we're moving a bunch of the low, so it's making room for the kick and the bass and all that good stuff. And then I think the on the number 8 here, the low pass filter, this is simply actually just for automation. So at different points in the song, it's automating in. The main thing I'm using to actually shape the sound is on the 4th node here. There's a high shelf, and this is sometimes a more natural way to remove some of the highs and help nestle in a sound. With that said, then there's a couple of extra little things that I want to show you. So I'm just going to have to move the loop here and show you what we got going on here. So first is this sound here. Let me just jump to it, fuck it. And watch the EQ here. Down again. And then so what I'm going for here is it's very similar to, let me solo these two sounds. It's kind of reinforcing these two. Sounds freaking cool. So the idea here is, felt like it wasn't fully getting the vibe of like the swelling bit here, I guess. And it's also something I just happened to fall upon while in Splice and thought it sounded cool, so like I'm gonna include this in the track. So it's doing a similar thing, working with that other sound that we first showed off right here if you watch the mode jiggle. So a little bit more of a happy accident, just letting like as I'm discovering loops and stuff like that kind of shape where things are going. Basically just automating in the low pass filter, so it's slowly slowing in the sound. A little bit of sidechain, so it's pumping and making room for the kick. And the next thing I added was this little bit, so let's have a listen to this. Let me find a spot where it's playing fully. Probably here. So listen over here. It's very rhythmic. I'm gonna solo it for you. Weird, right? So very percussive, very rhythmic. What I was doing here was in the song like Caribou Honey, if you listen to the full thing, it has this break where like the most like magical synth stuff is happening, and I was trying at one point to like fully do a recreation of it, and it was honestly too difficult for me. But so what I did do at one point is I just cut a piece of that synth, consolidated it, and then I dropped it into Synplant 2. You can see here, Caribou, Honey, like what it's referencing is this bit that I added in. I think it deletes it unfortunately, but they have this thing called Genopatch, where if you drag something in, it'll use AI or machine learning to try to recreate the sample that you drop into it with synthesis. And so from that's where I got this interesting sound. It's like a machine learning attempt to recreate a bit from that Caribou tune. And so one thing that I like to do when working with this is I have this spectral resonator on. So let me turn it off for a moment. Still sounds kind of cool and interesting. I like throwing on the spectral resonator because one thing you can do is you can set the mode to MIDI and then say MIDI from and put it on like the track that it's doing, and it'll move the spectral resonator key to follow the notes that your MIDI track is playing. And so what it can do is sometimes when using this machine learning AI trick that I just showed you, it can come off as very percussive and lacking a key or a tonality. And the spectral, or it could be like kind of like pushing the key into a weird, like shitty sounding fucking note. And so I find by throwing the spectral resonator on, you can use it to influence that sound and put it more into key and something more musical and usable. Because this machine learning version of it is still very, I don't know, it'd be cool if it could eventually just like actually copy a sound. But right now I don't think it can. It's a little bit more for like making weird, interesting textures and stuff like this. So that's a little trick right there. That I like to do. And then other than that, just removing some of the lows, some side chains so it's pumping, saturation so it's filling up the sound a little bit, and then the one knob with plug into make things a little bit wider. But yeah, that's a look at how I went about the synth and everything for this. It's a lot more minimal. The vocals are really carrying it quite a bit. And there's a lot of like interesting sound design bits in like the drum section. If you remember, if you watched the drum section of this breakdown, there's a lot of like interesting stuff going on there. And it's mostly almost like sound effects and stuff like that. There's not like a traditional, I don't know, piano or anything like that playing. So I think it's really fun to make this kind of stuff. It's all like swelling sounds and all these things like swirling around. And yeah, had a really good time cracking on with this one. So hope you found this useful, and what we'll do is an 80-20 rule recap. I know it's a little bit different than how I usually go about things, but I think you'll find it useful to recap the 80-20 rule so you can apply what you learn to your own tracks. Before we do that, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by our good friends over at Rocker Powered Sounds. They've hooked up the drum samples in this, particularly the main kick that you're hearing here. And like kick samples, sound, one shots like that is such a fundamental part of like making your music sound professional. So definitely appreciate them hooking us up here, because if you grab the project files for this, link in the description, all that, you'll get access to the RPS tracks or samples that they were so happy to provide us. And then also on screen right now, you can get 30% off of their ultimate sample pack, which is the sample pack that I use to grab these. And there's over 1,000 samples in it, super useful and usable stuff. So shout out to them for hooking up the community here. You can get 30% off if you use the link that's on screen now, Ultimate Best Friends, or the link that's in the description as well. But yeah, definitely want to say thank you to them for hooking us up here. And with that said, let's jump into the 80-20 rule for this one. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, You can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later. And check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.